Let's be absolutely clear about what's happening here. For years, the rules around dual citizenship for Americans have been, at best, murky, a patchwork of legal gray zones and diplomatic headaches and diplomatic contradictions. But now, in October 2025, that landscape is shifting. The U.S. government has rolled out major updates to how it recognizes and regulates dual citizenship, changes that could reshape not just paperwork and passports, but people's identities, where they belong, who they owe allegiance to, and what it means to be American in an increasingly globalized world. Now, the administration says these new rules are about clarity and security, about making the process fairer, more transparent, and in step with modern realities. But let's not take that at face value, because behind the polished press releases and patriotic sound bites lie some uncomfortable questions. Who really benefits from these new restrictions? Are they designed to make life easier for law-abiding Americans abroad, or harder for immigrants and dual nationals caught in the system's crossfire? And what does this mean for millions of Americans who live, work, or have family ties overseas? So tonight we're cutting through the jargon. We'll tell you exactly what's changing, who's affected, and what you need to do if you hold or are applying for a second passport. No spin, no bureaucracy, just facts, context, and a healthy dose of accountability. Because when governments redraw the boundaries of citizenship, it's not just a policy shift, it's a redefinition of belonging itself. In October 2025, the U.S. government unveiled sweeping new federal guidelines that redefine who qualifies for dual citizenship and under what conditions it can be maintained. For decades, the rules surrounding dual nationality in the United States have been a complex mix of legal precedent, policy discretion, and administrative practice, often leaving citizens in a haze of uncertainty. But these new changes mark the most significant overhaul in years, setting clearer criteria for eligibility while also tightening oversight. The updated framework seeks to modernize how the U.S. Handles cases of multiple citizenships in a world where globalization, remote work, and international mobility are blurring traditional notions of national belonging. Under the new policy, eligibility for dual citizenship will now depend not only on birthright or lineage, but also on demonstrable continuing ties to the United States. This could include tax filings, property ownership, or periods of residence, all designed to ensure that Americans holding a second nationality maintain a meaningful connection to their home country. The State Department and Department of Homeland Security have jointly emphasized that these reforms aim to close loopholes that have allowed individuals to exploit overlapping legal systems for personal or financial advantage. Critics, however, argue that such provisions risk creating a two-tier system where only the wealthy or well-documented can easily prove their allegiance, while others face bureaucratic hurdles. The government also introduced a formal review mechanism requiring dual citizens to disclose their secondary nationality upon renewal of their U.S. This new reporting standard is being presented as a transparency measure meant to strengthen national security and prevent conflicts of interest, particularly among those in sensitive professions such as government service or defense contracting. Yet privacy advocates have raised alarms, warning that such disclosures could lead to discrimination or targeted scrutiny against dual nationals from specific countries. The reforms further empower immigration and customs officers to request documentation verifying compliance with these rules, effectively adding another layer of accountability or surveillance depending on one's perspective. In practical terms, This means the concept of dual citizenship is no longer a static status, but a dynamic one that must be reaffirmed and documented periodically. Americans abroad, expatriates, and those with inherited citizenship from another country are being urged to review their legal standing immediately to avoid penalties or future conflicts. The administration insists that these measures reflect a necessary modernization of outdated laws that failed to anticipate the realities of a global citizenry. But many experts caution that redefining eligibility is not just a matter of policy, it's a matter of identity. The second major change announced under the new dual citizenship policy centers on stricter disclosure requirements for all U.S. citizens who hold or are applying for another nationality. For years, the disclosure process was largely informal and inconsistently enforced, relying on individuals to self-report secondary citizenships during passport renewals or visa applications. That leniency, according to the government, left too many blind spots in tracking who owed allegiance to multiple states and under what circumstances. The revised framework now makes full disclosure a legal obligation rather than a procedural courtesy, with new penalties for omissions or misrepresentations that can include fines, passport revocation, or even prosecution in severe cases. This enhanced scrutiny comes with a centralized digital registry overseen by the State Department and cross-reference with Homeland Security databases, allowing authorities to monitor dual nationals more efficiently. Citizens will now be required to declare not only their second citizenship, but also any pending applications or eligibility claims, even if those foreign citizenships are not yet formally recognized. Argues that such transparency is vital for national security, particularly at a time when dual nationals may have competing obligations or access to sensitive information in more than one country. However, civil liberties groups have warned that this level of surveillance could erode privacy and stigmatize those with multicultural identities or foreign family ties. Officials have also clarified that disclosure is not optional even in cases where dual citizenship arises automatically through marriage or descent. This means that individuals who may not have actively pursued a second nationality, such as children born abroad to American parents or those inheriting citizenship from a foreign-born spouse, are still required to report it. The State Department insists that the measure is not punitive but protective, designed to ensure clarity of legal status and prevent future disputes over taxation, conscription, or diplomatic protection. Yet critics argue that the rule disproportionately burdens diaspora communities and naturalized citizens who already face complicated paperwork in balancing their identities between two systems. While the government claims these measures will strengthen transparency and trust, many observers see them as part of a broader tightening of control over cross-border mobility and dual allegiances. By demanding total disclosure and linking multiple databases, the United States is effectively redefining the boundaries of citizenship, not just as a right, but as a monitored condition that must be continuously justified and documented. The third development in the October 2020-25 introduces a new stream reform package, introduces a new streamlined application process aimed at Americans living abroad who are seeking to formalize or retain dual nationality. For years, the process has been notorious for its complexity, lengthy paperwork, inconsistent embassy procedures, and a lack of coordination between federal and consular authorities. The new system, according to the State Department, is designed to simplify that experience by introducing a unified digital platform that integrates application submissions, background checks, and interview scheduling in one place. Applicants will now be able to track their case progress online, submit supporting documents electronically, and receive notifications in real time. Modernization move that officials say brings the dual citizenship process into the 21st century. Beyond convenience, the reform seeks to eliminate redundant verification steps that previously delayed approvals for months or even years. By combining databases from Homeland Security, the IRS, and the Department of State, the new framework allows for faster identity verification, reduced document duplication, and a clearer chain of accountability between agencies. This integration is meant to serve both efficiency and security, ensuring that applicants are vetted comprehensively, but without unnecessary administrative friction. However, immigration attorneys have already expressed concern that while the system may be more efficient, it could also concentrate data vulnerabilities in a single platform, creating potential privacy risks for applicants whose personal and financial information will now be shared across multiple government entities. The new guidelines also establish standardized processing times, a long overdue measure for those frustrated by the unpredictability of embassy workloads. Routine applications are now expected to be processed within 6 months, with expedited cases prioritized for individuals facing urgent legal or employment deadlines. Additionally, applicants will be able to correct minor clerical errors without restarting the process, a change that addresses one of the most common complaints from overseas Americans dealing with rigid procedural rules. Still, despite these improvements, advocacy groups caution that the streamlined process could become a double-edged sword if used to tighten eligibility criteria under the guise of efficiency. In essence, this reform reimagines the dual citizenship application not as a privilege reserved for the few, but as a manageable, transparent process for the many who live transnational lives. Yet beneath the promise of simplicity lies a deeper shift, a government increasingly using technology to define and manage belonging in ways that blur the line between accessibility and oversight. One of the most closely watched components of the new dual citizenship reforms is the introduction of enhanced security vetting measures aimed at preventing fraud, espionage, and identity manipulation among dual nationals. The government has argued that in a world of rising geopolitical tension and cyber threats, the existing system for verifying second citizenships was outdated and vulnerable to exploitation. The updated framework now expands interagency coordination between the State Department, Department of Homeland Security, and the Department of Justice to conduct deeper background checks on all dual citizenship applicants and renewals. This includes advanced biometric screening, cross-referencing with international law enforcement databases, and new risk assessment protocols designed to identify individuals with conflicting loyalties or undisclosed affiliations. Officials describe these changes as a security-first modernization effort, emphasizing that the vast majority of law-abiding dual nationals have nothing to fear. They insist the reforms target only those who attempt to misuse multiple passports for illicit financial activity, sanctions evasion, or intelligence gathering. However, legal experts and civil rights organizations have voiced unease over the potential for discriminatory profiling, particularly against applicants from countries deemed high risk or adversarial to U.S. interests. Critics warn that what is being presented as a technical upgrade could, in practice, amount to a form of political screening, where citizenship rights are weighed against foreign policy considerations. The enhanced vetting process also introduces a continuous monitoring component, meaning that security checks will not end once citizenship is approved or renewed. Instead, Periodic background evaluations will be triggered automatically by certain activities such as cross-border financial transactions, long-term stays abroad, or foreign government employment. While officials claim this will help detect emerging threats in real time, privacy advocates argue that it effectively transforms dual citizens into permanent subjects of surveillance, their status perpetually under review. This continuous verification model blurs the distinction between legitimate security oversight and intrusive state monitoring, raising broader constitutional questions about equal protection and due process. Supporters of the policy say the reforms will restore confidence in the integrity of U.S. citizenship by ensuring that dual nationals truly meet the nation's loyalty standards in a volatile global environment. Yet opponents see a deeper motive at play, an attempt to redefine citizenship itself as a conditional status, contingent upon ongoing compliance with security expectations rather than a guaranteed right once granted. Another crucial aspect of the October 2025 of reforms focus on tightening tax and reporting obligations for Americans holding dual citizenship or residing abroad. For years, the U.S. has already maintained one of the most stringent tax systems in the world, requiring citizens to file income reports regardless of where they live. Yet under the new rules, these requirements have become even more comprehensive. The government now mandates enhanced disclosure of foreign bank accounts, real estate holdings, business interests, and even joint financial ventures held with non-American spouses or partners. The stated purpose is to increase transparency, curb tax evasion, and close loopholes that previously allowed certain individuals to obscure overseas income. But financial experts warn that the changes may also add an unprecedented level of administrative burden on ordinary Americans living abroad who are simply managing family assets or small businesses. The Internal Revenue Service has introduced a new digital reporting system designed to synchronize foreign asset declarations with the Department of Treasury's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. This integration allows for real-time cross-referencing of declared assets, improving the government's ability to detect inconsistencies or undeclared accounts. While this move aligns with international anti-money laundering initiatives, it also places Americans abroad under closer scrutiny than ever before. Those who fail to comply face stiffer penalties, including larger fines, suspension of passport privileges, and potential criminal prosecution for willful noncompliance. Critics argue that these measures could alienate U.S. citizens living overseas, many of whom already struggle with the dual challenge of meeting two countries' tax systems at once. In addition to enforcement, the reform includes a new certification process requiring dual citizens to confirm their tax compliance status before renewing a U.S. passport. This requirement effectively ties one's ability to travel or maintain citizenship documentation to financial transparency, creating what some advocacy groups have called a financial gatekeeping mechanism. The government defends this as a fair accountability standard, emphasizing that responsible taxpayers should have nothing to fear. However, privacy advocates counter that it turns citizenship maintenance into a transactional exchange where access to rights is contingent upon bureaucratic clearance. These developments reflect a broader shift in how the U.S. defines civic responsibility in a globalized economy. Dual citizens are increasingly being treated not only as cultural and legal participants in multiple societies, but also as financial entities to be monitored and regulated, blurring the line between security policy and fiscal control. The sixth major change in the new dual citizenship framework addresses the process of renunciation, which has been made clearer, more structured, and significantly more expensive. For years, Americans wishing to renounce their citizenship faced a confusing web of consular procedures, inconsistent fees, and long waiting times at embassies. The government's new policy aims to bring uniformity to this process, outlining a standardized global protocol that all consulates must follow. Under the revised system, applicants must complete a comprehensive digital pre-screening before scheduling an in-person interview, which includes verification of tax compliance, security clearance checks, and confirmation of any outstanding federal obligations. Officials claim that this modernization ensures due diligence and protects against fraudulent or coerced renunciations, while critics argue that it places unnecessary bureaucratic hurdles in front of those exercising a legal right to expatriate. The most controversial element of this reform is the substantial increase in the renunciation fee, which has been raised to $5,000 and a significant jump from previous costs. The State Department justifies this by citing administrative expenses and the resources required to process complex cases, but many see it as a deterrent aimed at discouraging mass renunciations, particularly among citizens living abroad who are frustrated by rising tax and reporting demands. Legal analysts have noted that this fee increase could have a chilling effect on individuals of modest means, effectively turning citizenship renunciation into a privilege reserved for the financially capable. Several advocacy organizations are already preparing to challenge the new cost in court, arguing that it violates basic principles of fairness and access to due process. The updated protocol also formalizes a cooling-off period, a mandatory waiting phase between application submission and final approval, meant to ensure that applicants have fully considered the long-term consequences of their decision. During this period, individuals are required to complete an online educational module explaining the legal, financial, and social implications of renouncing U.S. citizenship. Proponents see this as a safeguard against impulsive decisions, while opponents view it as paternalistic and unnecessarily intrusive. Additionally, the government will now maintain a permanent public registry of renunciations, purportedly for transparency, though privacy advocates fear it could stigmatize former citizens or expose them to discrimination abroad. Altogether, these changes transform renunciation from a relatively procedural act into a regulated, monitored, and financially burdensome process, reflecting a broader shift in how the government views the act of leaving, not as a personal decision, but as a matter of national interest and control. A significant dimension of the October 2025 dual citizenship reforms involves a comprehensive review of reciprocity agreements with key allies, reshaping how the United States interacts with other nations that recognize or restrict dual nationality. Reciprocity agreements have long served as the diplomatic backbone that determines how countries treat each other's dual citizens, governing everything from taxation and military service obligations to legal protections and extradition policies. The U.S. government now plans to reassess these agreements to ensure they align with updated national security and citizenship priorities. Officials have emphasized that the goal is to create fair, balanced, and mutually accountable partnerships, but analysts note that the initiative could also be used to pressure foreign governments into adopting stricter controls over dual nationals, particularly in cases where American interests are perceived to be at risk. Under this new framework, the State Department is tasked with conducting bilateral reviews with over 30 countries, prioritizing those with large American expatriate populations such as Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, and Israel. These discussions are expected to focus on harmonizing tax obligations, clarifying military service exemptions, and establishing clear rules for diplomatic protection in cases of arrest or detention abroad. One of the more controversial proposals involves expanding data sharing arrangements to include citizenship and residency information, effectively giving both governments greater visibility into the movements and affiliations of dual nationals. While proponents say this will strengthen cooperation and prevent legal loopholes, critics argue that it could lead to overreach and potential breaches of privacy. Another key aspect of the reciprocity review concerns countries that prohibit dual citizenship altogether or impose strict limitations on it. The United States is considering retaliatory measures, including restricting visa privileges or consular services for citizens of nations that refuse to recognize U.S. dual nationals. This approach marks a more assertive stance than in previous decades, signaling Washington's intention to defend the rights of Americans abroad even as it tightens its own domestic policies. Diplomats warn, however, that such measures could spark tensions with allies and complicate international mobility for millions of dual citizens who navigate multiple legal systems. The broader implications of these changes extend beyond paperwork and diplomacy. By re-evaluating reciprocity agreements, the U.S. is effectively redefining the geopolitical meaning of dual citizenship, transforming it from a matter of personal identity into a tool of strategic negotiation, where allegiance, access, and accountability become bargaining chips in an increasingly interconnected world. The final and perhaps most politically charged aspect of the new dual citizenship reforms is the growing public backlash and the wave of legal challenges already taking shape. Within weeks of the October 2025 announcement, advocacy groups representing expatriates, immigrants, and civil liberties organizations began mobilizing against what they describe as an overreach of government authority. Their argument is simple. While the reforms claim to promote clarity and security, they in fact erode fundamental rights tied to citizenship, privacy, and freedom of movement. Lawsuits have already been filed in federal courts challenging several components of the policy, particularly the new disclosure requirements, the steep renunciation fees, and the enhanced surveillance measures embedded in the security vetting system. Plaintiffs contend that these changes create a two-tier citizenship model, treating dual nationals as inherently less trustworthy and burdening them with obligations not imposed on single-status citizens. Public sentiment has been equally divided. Some Americans see the reforms as a necessary step in protecting national interests and maintaining control in an age of global instability. Others view them as a betrayal of the inclusive principles that define the modern American identity. Social media platforms have become battlegrounds of debate, with hashtags like #FayRightToDual and #FayCitizenshipControl trending as critics accuse the government of politicizing nationality. Prominent legal scholars and former diplomats have joined the discussion, warning that while the policies are framed as administrative reforms, their broader impact could reshape the relationship between citizens and the state in profound ways. They argue that once citizenship becomes conditional, subject to ongoing compliance, financial reporting, and periodic review, it ceases to function as a guaranteed right and starts to resemble a managed privilege. Meanwhile, Congress faces mounting pressure to review and possibly amend parts of the reform. Several lawmakers, particularly those representing districts with large immigrant or expatriate communities, have called for hearings to examine the constitutional implications of the new rules. There are also growing demands for the creation of an independent oversight body to monitor how these laws are implemented abroad especially in cases where U.S. citizens report harassment or discrimination tied to their dual status. This wave of resistance highlights a broader cultural reckoning, one that forces Americans to confront difficult questions about identity, loyalty, and belonging in a time when citizenship itself is being redefined by technology, security concerns, and global mobility